Hello and welcome back to the show, Louise Lally podcast. I'm super excited about the topic today, and I'm even more excited to have a good friend of mine, Eddie O'Connell, on to discuss a really cool topic, which I'm going to divulge in a minute. Before I jump on to that, I want to introduce Eddie O'Connell, and he's Managing Director for OMT Global. Eddie, will you tell people a little bit about yourself and a little bit about OMT Global if they haven't heard of you guys already?
Okay, thank you very much, Louise, and thank you for asking me to be on today. I'm delighted to be here and really looking forward to the conversation. I suppose just on OMT Global, we're based out of Limerick. We also have an office in the UAE and one in the US. And I suppose everything under the umbrella of leadership development we are interested in. And I suppose the one thing that defines us when we talk to our clients and work with our clients is that we are very outcome oriented. Really working hard for the individual, the team, and the organization to provide value for each of those and respective, let's say, stakeholders. And we love what we do. And we've been around for about 35 years, more actually, 36 or 7, I guess. I joined OMT in 2006. And before that, I lived in Japan for about 16 years. I had a business over there, taught English for a few years at the very beginning, and then ended up teaching at university, worked in virtual systems, multimedia, the games industry, even though I'm not a gamer. And also since 2014, I've been kind of semi-based out of Dubai. And I go over almost every month and work with clients in the region. And but love being back in Ireland, of course, and all the time. Kids are spread all over the world. Taken after me, I guess. But yeah, delighted to be here. Hopefully that will do to start anyway.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eddie. Thanks for that intro. Fantastic. I suppose I was very much intrigued, and I had to get Eddie involved in this conversation with you all today because I came across a little bit of research recently in the last couple of weeks, and it piqued my attention because we've all heard of the Great Resignation. And what I came across was a number of studies to show that there is a huge manager crash about to happen. So there is going to be the Great Resignation for managers, and in particular those middle management teams. And I suppose just to give context to this to the listeners or anyone that's watching, if they're on LinkedIn, and I'll have the link actually underneath as well. This came from Deloitte's 2024 Human Capital Trends report, where 53% of managers reported feeling burnt out at work. That's more than half. And 66% actually would consider leaving their roles for jobs that would better support their well-being. And it really poses the question, I suppose, and this is where me and Eddie had a brief chat there about a week ago, and we said this would make a really interesting podcast, is why is this happening, Eddie? And I think we had a little bit of a chat around it. What are we seeing? Obviously, you're in the leadership development side of things. I work with retailers. Why do we think this is happening, Eddie? Your
I
take on
think
it, I suppose.
there are a lot of reasons, but I think
Yeah.
over the last 10, 15 years in particular, I think the role of the middle manager in particular has gotten way more complex. The demands are incredibly high. I think, let's say, even if we just assume getting results, establishing and leading teams effectively as being something that was, we would have worked hard to get years ago. Now that's just absolutely, accepted as basic. Now you've got managers or part-time, performance coaches, part mental health first responders, they're strategists. The expectations on them are greater than ever before. And unfortunately, I think the learning and development world hasn't kept up with the need that managers have to be the best that they can be in the complex times that we're in, to be honest, Louise. And that's kind of a very short version, but it's far more complex than even what I've just said there. And I think I'm not surprised. It surprised me when you told me initially. I was a bit shocked when I heard that 53%. But then, as we discussed, I'm not surprised really, to be honest. It's a tough place to be right now, when you think about it.
Yeah, and I think what's really, really interesting, Eddie, and I suppose from going through the different research was what kind of stood out at me, I suppose, Eddie, was that I I was actually working with stores as in-house in 2019
Hmm.
prior to COVID hitting in 2020. And if I was to tell you, Eddie, and I was in the industry for over 15 years at that point, what that middle manager role looked like in 2019, it is very different now sitting here in 2025. And the expectation, I think, is a lot greater
Hmm.
from supporting mental well-being to working with the different generations in the workforce at the moment to driving change because we've gone through a huge amount of change over the last couple of years. And I think the managers probably were firefighting through those
Hmm.
changes. I think what we're seeing now is, that leveling off period, which kind of ties into the time if we look at it, right? So we're
Hmm.
firefighting for those couple of years through COVID. Now we're seeing a lot of those processes, a lot of those teams working remotely and different things like that. We're now looking for more change. Some companies are bringing them back. Others are saying, no, they're great out there on their own. Now you've that manager trying to juggle all of those different things. And maybe at the time, because COVID was going so rapidly, Eddie, that managers were not probably putting a lot of thought into how do I do this well. They were just rolling with the punches as such and going and going and going. And now it's kind of that pace is leveling off. They're realizing it's taken a bit of a toll in them. And yeah,
True. I think let's imagine somebody who's 35 today who was
yes,
born in 1990
yeah.
and they are now, well into their career. And their career, let's say, as they were leaving school in 2008, there was an economic crash, and the effects of which are still probably felt in many, in some ways in society today. Even look at the housing problem, you could say was, started the we never recovered the growth in housing development since 2008. So they entered the workforce, enter university life in the middle of the worst recession since the 1930s, and then came out into a recession. They were just about to kick off their career in maybe 2012, 13, 14. They're 5 years into it, and bang comes COVID. And now, so that happens, let's say, when they're 30 years old. Housing is still a crisis. They're trying to juggle everything in their personal lives. And now, not only that, you've got the let's say remote teams, hybrid teams, the skills required, the resilience required in order to be effective as a manager today are they're very complicated and complex, but also for people, as you say, who probably at 35 are going, you know what, when am I going to get a break from this? Am I really tooled up? Am I ready to go on again? So I think we have that situation where they do need support. Um, and not only that, we're also in a time now when we have more change coming through AI, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a kind of a step back, reset, and go again. We can't have more of the same because more of the same is not going to solve anything or do anything. And I think we've got to get away from people thinking that we measure learning by numbers, and it has to be learning by impact. And I think
Yeah.
we're focused on the wrong stuff, and we've given people the wrong stuff. Well, we may have the intention was there to give the right stuff to help
Mhm.
people along, but the speed of change is so great that we have to refocus our efforts in order to give middle managers something, because they are in a different place than, let's say, I was when I was 35. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting what you said there, Eddie. And I definitely think there's more, there's a lot in what you said there in regards to how are we actually measuring that success factor when it comes to those middle management teams. And I think you're right, sometimes that short-term view isn't looked at. And when you say the word impact to me is that real longevity, that long-term thinking, that
Hmm.
that you're thinking when we look at middle managers and teams. And I think a big thing I'm seeing, particularly with that workforce at the moment, Eddie, and that particular example you gave of that 30-year-old to now 35-year-old, and those different, we have to really look at that environment and how they grew up in that, because that really is playing into what we're seeing at the moment. Because if I think about it, a lot of what's out there at the moment, we're doing a huge amount, and I suppose well-being programs across the board. But where I'm probably not seeing that is how do we now upskill those middle managers to internally manage and lead that well-being piece of the business themselves without, we look at, you said there, you've online, you've, EAP programs, all of these things, Eddie, which are important and they're
Mm,
part of it, but they're not, I would say sometimes they're looked at that as all of the solution. Sometimes I think it's looking at it, and if we look at this as a guiding tool, how are we, from a well-being perspective, supporting those managers that are maybe taking on more of a higher workload, because we're
mm,
seeing that retention rates are an issue, especially with the cost, with the minimum wage going up. A lot of businesses now have less staff in, so you've less heads, which means that manager now has more of a workload, or they have a higher expectation in productivities of the team around them. What are we doing to help them manage their own mental health well-being? Or are we looking at it like it's a one size fits all approach? We're going to put in a well-being program, Eddie, and regardless of the responsibility you have in your managerial role, you're all getting the same training, even though we know you, Eddie, are dealing with staff coming to you telling you, I'm actually suffering from anxiety or depression, and you don't know how to have those conversations.
true, true.
Yeah, so like, what's your take on that? Because I think that's really important, Eddie, and it's something I definitely seen, but I'm not, I suppose, I feel the industry hasn't caught up
Mm.
with that.
I think there's a lot of, let's say there's a lot of good intent, but
Mhm.
I think that intent is often misplaced. And I think, for example, you have people will often see a deficit. Let's say if they see something that's a skills deficit, skills gap, we need this, let's do this program and plug in the program, and therefore it's okay. So it's a very transactional approach. That if we, and many of the people who are commissioning the budgets for learning and development programs are ones that sometimes see it in that very transactional way. Somebody comes along, they make a pitch, and they say, we need this we have a problem here. We've done an engagement survey. We've got this data. We need to do some programs on A, B, and C. And the person says, okay, let's invest in the program. Let's invest in the people. And I
Yeah.
think in a way, then the the misplacement is the fact that by just completing the program, that everything is going to be okay, and that almost as if learning is finished when you finish the program. I find sometimes that we don't, some people misunderstand that learning is something that happens over a period of time. Tooling up and skilling up happens over time. The program is only getting to the starting line. It's the application of the skills, and in a supportive environment where those skills become highly competent, where you become highly competent and skillful. That's when the real impact is made. And I think very often then, when people need time to develop those skills post program and in the workplace, they're not often given the time. And one of the things I've said to a company over in the Middle East recently was, until you put a firewall around learning and development, it is going to be continuously attacked by managers and senior managers in organizations who are interfering with people's learning journeys. And they are not giving the learning journey the respect or the time it needs in order to come to evolve and become, to have value for the individual on that journey. And whereas no company would ever, example, operate without a firewall in today's world. Cybersecurity, we take it seriously, because if a company is attacked, boom,
Yeah.
systems come down. We don't put a firewall around learning. We don't put a firewall around people's development. We just allow it to somehow be interfered with continuously. And I think there's an intention, a good intention there to develop people, but there is a misplaced understanding of how that works. And I think in now a complex environment like we're in today, I think we have to take a step back and say, what really is learning? How does it work? How do we support a person through that journey? And what are everybody's roles in helping individuals learn in a very positive way? And I know I've kind of
Yeah.
rambled a bit
Yeah.
there, Louise, but that's where I
Yeah.
think we have to look at it in a fresh way, you know?
Yeah, yeah, no, and I can totally understand that, and it's what's kind of brought that question around as well is that there's a huge amount of data out there to say that the Gen Z workforce is really, I think it's over two-thirds is so much. There's so much of a focus on organizations to have a really strong well-being strategy and program. And I think a lot of those organizations, Eddie, and it's quite interesting you said that are maybe working tirelessly and quite hard in
True.
putting together these programs in order to retain their staff, in order to engage, and maybe they're getting it through employee surveys that maybe it's not that they're not doing it. Maybe it's
Mm.
the approach and how they're implementing it is something that needs to be revisited. Because that's where the success seems to be at, is that we're probably not looking at that embedding piece, as well as we are looking at it. When we're doing maybe a needs analysis piece on it and we're scoping it out, that work has been done really well. But when we're implementing it, that we're not giving it that time, as you said, that firewall example of, are we actually putting the same amount of effort, I would say, into the implementation embedding? And from what you're saying, that's not actually being done.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
in general, no. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think we have to move away from a transactional approach to learning to a transformational one, where the focus is on the individual, that the transformation takes time, and it's not something that you just plug in and away you go. Now, I'm being a bit facetious, but at the same
yeah,
time, I've seen too many people in who have great influence in learning environments who are not learning professionals, but who might have a lot of influence with budget, and their view of learning and development is nowhere near what it should be from a 2025 perspective. And I think they have to move away from it being a transactional,
yeah,
a cost or some basic investment, to something that is far more transformational, and given the proper time in order to make that investment turn into something that would be of value to the individual, their teams, their organization, and their customers. I think we have to play the long game when it comes to learning, not the short game.
yeah, 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 yeah. I think yeah, and I suppose, Eddie, what do you think is needed? Do you think that with this manager crash they're predicting, do you think that because of there's going to be maybe a more focus now on human skills because we're bringing in a lot of maybe streamlined processes with AI,
Yeah.
with the focus of maybe the Gen Z workforce, then we've Gen X, I think, coming up behind them, and there's a real drive on well-being and supports that. Do you think maybe that's a catalyst then maybe for those companies to look at it in a different way?
Yeah, I think there's some companies I work with, for example,
Mm.
where you have let's say if we were to just kind of dive into the be granular for a second, you
Yeah,
have your open people who attend within organizations to attend open programs on various different topics, like they would have done down through the years, and whether they're virtual or whether they're in person. In person, I think you always get a better response from people anyway. But those programs are becoming more outcome oriented, I think, and a lot of companies are, following up with group coaching and individual coaching in order to get the learning embedded. But what we're now seeing more and more is companies are investing in teams, And they're saying to, let's, if you're going to be leading the team, you need the team to support you. You need individuals on the team to understand how teams actually work. So it's like, here's the manager cannot be the person who carries the entire load and expectation and responsibility for everything. So others who are part of the team need to be part of, let's say, the whole success of the team. And I think when we do that, I think managers can get people to understand what it's like, but also develop together, work together, be a team, not just, and also go on a team journey, a team development journey. And I think and I love when you see that happening and some organizations are willing to do it. And you can see the success and how that pays back to the organization and to the teams and to the managers. Managers in those situations definitely feel more supported, more not just by the organization, but by their teams and then the teams that they subsequently work with as well, cross-functionally. But that's just one example, Louise.
Yeah, no, I think you've brought up something really, I think really important there is around the embedding in of it through coaching. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think what I've seen definitely, Eddie, over the last number of years is a huge amount of organizations now seeing coaching part of that learning and development function in their organization and seeing the coaching as part of their work-based learning assessments, I would say. So their observations, be it through a task, be it through a people piece, that they're seeing, I suppose, the impact, if we want to look at that word again, you said earlier, of that learning and development through the behaviors, and there seems to be more of a move now. I think social media and all of these platforms has obviously driven up people's understanding of that a lot more, I would say, and
True.
nearly coaching is seen now as cool, in a lot of people wouldn't have seen it that way, I suppose, and it would be seen as it's needed. Whereas I think that need, probably maybe from a marketing perspective as well, wasn't seen as such a necessity as it is now. And is that fueling, do you think, a lot of those positive changes you're seeing in learning and development?
Spot on, Louise. I think that when you think about coaching from an individual group, or let's say individual coaching, group coaching, or team coaching, that's where I'm seeing the biggest return on investment from let's say, imagine if we wore a CFO hat now for a second, because what's happening, and I'll give you an example. Recently, I was doing some work in the Levant, let's say in Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and we have a team over there of 5 countries, and we did a group coach. We did a leadership development program over a period of time, and then we followed it up with group coaching. But the great thing was, when you get into the group coaching space, you are now working with people who are highly motivated to learn and to develop themselves. They're self-directed and they're going to push hard. When you come, and we had, at the end of our second session in April, I remember I said to somebody afterwards, the best hour of my year. And the reason was 2 things happened. One, people were demonstrating to themselves, very importantly, and to others who were on the program, that they were achieving and making progress in terms of their leadership competency. But the second thing, which was incredible, was an unexpected benefit, was their passion now to develop themselves as leaders was so ignited that they are going to sustain this. This is going to be the energy that will sustain their development by themselves for the next 2 or 3 years. And I think if a company could see that by investing in the right way, and give managers the lift, the boost that they have. Look, when you look at managers, they're intelligent, hardworking people who have sacrificed a lot to be able to do what they can do. They just need an ignition or a boost or some support to develop their confidence and their competence. And when they get that lift, then magic happens. They can sustain it. But until they are given the right support, it's not good for them. It's not good for the organization. It's not good for their team, the teams they lead, and it's not good for the customers.
Yeah, and I think that's a great story because I think when you get people in the room, and it's showing up a lot, Eddie, in the studies that I've been looking at lately around work-based learning, learning in person versus virtual. And look, I think there's a place for both, but I do think those interpersonal skills, that training is so vital where feasible to have it in person, Eddie, because you understand different personalities. You get a perspective, I think, with the in person that you can't get with the online, which I think is
Totally.
yeah, yeah,
Totally true. I mean,
yeah.
you can't beat that energy, and you're right because, and again, even somebody recently, I was over in Saudi Arabia, and somebody said that they had just done a program for a couple of months, but one of the great outputs of that was they were now having their monthly meetings where all the team would be together, and they were using Kahoot and quizzes and the camaraderie and the spirit in the office, which had nothing to do with the program that they were on, but just the fact that they were together on a program created a whole new bond between the individuals on the team and across the business, that they're now, when they meet, their engagement levels are so high that their enjoyment levels are high. So there was again, that was never an intended outcome, but it happened because, as you say, they were in the room. Human interaction, human connection. You can't beat it, when in those in and it's, again, it's often overlooked because if people are only measuring numbers of the measuring and the numbers of people who attend rather than impact, they're not going to get the impact because they're only just counting who attends. And you can always attend, sign your name, and switch off, and
Mm.
that's not a sign. That doesn't do anything for anybody.
Mm. And I think with that as well, though, there's a lack of accountability, I think, from, if I feel that my learning journey is when I finish that day in the room, there is I think there's a real lack of accountability of where the real learning takes place. And I think for anyone that does, that's involved in learning and development in any way, that real learning actually takes place in the experiential phase when you're actually out on the floor and you're actually bringing it to life, and you're reflecting back on how you done that in your role or whatever training that you had that day that you can go out and do it. Um, I think what's really important here is that when managers go down, teams go down, and I don't think I hear that enough. I think it's really important that we can have a really great culture strategy piece in the boardroom, and we can have it with the senior exec team, and we can maybe communicate that as an instruction, a transactional piece down to those middle managers. But if they haven't been developed enough, where that impacts then is that the team underneath them, and where we start to see that is actually retention issues, succession planning, talent mapping. And that's not to say that those people down there that are underneath those managers, that they're not actually capable or competent to move up. It's just that that manager hasn't been maybe supported enough in the role, they haven't had enough coaching, they haven't been given the tools to support them in really doing what they do best, which is having a people first, perspective when it comes to their teams on the shop floor. So I suppose I'm going to end on this, Eddie.
Yep.
For everyone that's listening today, I'd like to ask you this question. Who is minding your managers? So if you can go away and think of that, and think of in the last 6 to 12 months, how have you supported your middle managers in minding them, and minding them from looking at a different well-being program that supports them because they have a very different role to the rest of the team, and then other ways, maybe it could be coaching, maybe it could be a training program you could put them on as a group and have them work together. Eddie, before we finish up, if anyone would like to reach out to you, how can they reach out to you?
Oh, just reach out to me on LinkedIn is an easy way, or go to the OMT Global website. I'm sure there's a link to where you can easily find me there as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you so much, Eddie.
Thank
Thank you
you. My
again.
pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.